Eduardo's hands trembled as he opened the black wooden box placed right in front of his door in miniature coffin. A .45 bullet. That was the price someone believed he had to pay after signing the extradition order for Pablo Escobar. And Eduardo, the judge who once thought he stood above all powers, had just added his own name to that list. The plan was very simple. Open the lid, understand the message, and know that from this moment there was no turning back. Eduardo bent down. The coffin lay there, silent, cold like an answer that needed no words. He picked up the bullet, his hands shaking violently. Beneath it was a small piece of paper folded in half. He unfolded it. The first time I pay you, the second time you choose. P.E. click. Not the sound of a gunshot, but the sound of his heart dropping into the void. The entire hallway in front of the house was dead silent. Eduardo slowly looked up, staring into the darkness ahead, and immediately understood something that no one but him would know. Escobar had known about the extradition order in advance, and this coffin was not a threat, it was the answer. And he had just been the one to open it. The coffin in Eduardo's hands had only one origin, one name: Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. To the Americans, he was the man who plunged their entire country into a white addiction. To the Colombian press, he was the shadow no politician dared look directly at. But in Medellin, that name carried a different weight. Escobar was the one who paid hospital bills for families he had never met, the one who gave houses to single mothers crammed into the slums, the one who lifted an entire poor city to challenge the richest nation in the world. Hero, demon, or something else, depending on who you asked. But everyone knew, when he wanted someone to live, they lived. When he wanted someone to disappear, they disappeared. Escobar did not rely on violence to maintain power. Exploding bombs, gunfire, bodies on the streets, that was just the part the world saw. What truly made him untouchable was the way he understood people who had a price, who had a weakness, who had loyalty enough to buy, who had fear enough to stay in place. His money formed a network stretching from Medellin to Bogotá, from the courts to the airports, from taxi drivers to members of Congress themselves. His generosity made the barrios see him as their pillar. His ruthlessness ensured traitors never tried a second time. And his mind, always 10 steps ahead of everyone, turned any move against him into something already too late. Colombia in the 1980s was the perfect stage for a man like him. The DEA poured agents into Bogotá. American media treated Medellin like a second front in the Cold War. Suitcases of cash crossed borders faster than international aid. Politicians in the capital sat in meetings debating what to do about Escobar, while police officers in Medellin just hoped it wasn't their turn that day. The Medellin cartel controlled nearly the entire flow of cocaine into the United States. Washington wanted extradition. Bogotá was divided, half wanting compromise, half afraid of being dragged into an unwinnable war. In that chaos, only one thing truly concerned Escobar: extradition to America. No cartel rules could save him inside a federal prison. No fortune could buy an American judge. No network existed beyond Colombia's borders. To him, extradition was not a sentence. It was a slow, dishonorable death. Escobar needed a shield within the system, not someone bought with money. That kind of person broke easily. He needed someone who could look straight at both the cartel and the government without flinching. Someone who leaned neither toward the DEA nor toward Bogotá's corruption. Someone in the middle, and that person was Eduardo Sanabria. Eduardo belonged to no side, had no political favors, tied to no powerful family. He was the kind of judge who made both sides, the state and the cartel, proceed with caution. The type of man who, when he brought down the gavel, everyone in the room knew he wasn't acting a part. Escobar saw that as an asset more valuable than any AK. Their first meeting happened without threats, without guards, without guns hidden in suit jackets. Just a thick envelope, no agreement spoken, no demands, no conditions. Eduardo didn't ask why. Escobar didn't explain. Just one sentence from him: Colombia's decisions must be made by Colombians. His voice neither loud nor low, but heavy like a verdict. Eduardo looked at the envelope longer than he wanted to admit. Inside was enough money to save his son with the heart condition. Overseas surgery costs weren't something a poorly paid judge could afford, and Escobar knew that, knew it precisely, knew it even before Eduardo said it. A man could refuse wealth, but hospitals couldn't, children couldn't. Eduardo took the money, not to side with Escobar, but to maintain his position, neutral, silent, not opening the door for the DEA, not aiding the cartel, just keeping the extradition gate closed. Escobar believed that a man like Eduardo wouldn't betray him, not for greed, not for fear, not for American promises. He believed Eduardo would stay in place, play his role, and do the one thing Escobar truly needed: prevent the extradition signature. But that belief only held when the world stayed still, when the DEA entered the game, when Washington pressured Bogotá, when evidence and threats started piling on Eduardo's desk. That envelope from years ago was no longer enough to maintain balance. A neutral judge became a man pulled in three directions: government, DEA, and cartel. Three forces strong enough to crush anyone in the middle. The coffin at the door didn't come from a new story. It came from the moment Eduardo decided to step out of that neutral position, and from then on, all Escobar needed to do was stand back and watch which way he chose. Eduardo still kept the envelope of money in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. He never opened it again, but its existence was enough to make him feel like he was standing on the edge. The extradition door remained closed, as Escobar wanted, and Eduardo remained neutral, as he had promised himself. But promises like that only held value when no one else knew about them. One afternoon, in the courthouse office, just after Eduardo had signed off on a civil case file, two men walked in without knocking. Gray suits, dark ties, the way they looked at him made it clear: DEA. They didn't introduce themselves, just placed an envelope on the desk, right in the center, exactly the way Pablo once had. But inside wasn't money. It was photos. Photos of him entering a small room in Medellin. Photos of him shaking hands with Escobar. Photos of his son holding the hospital bill envelope before the surgery. Photos of him leaving the hotel on the night Pablo had paid. No need for many words. No need for accusations. Just letting the photos lie there like a verdict without a judge. The man on the left spoke first. "You're a smart man, Judge Sanabria. You know what these mean." Eduardo didn't respond. The other leaned forward, voice low. "Washington is very interested in stopping Escobar. Very interested in anyone who helps him stay in power. They didn't state charges, didn't present an arrest warrant. They didn't need to. The evidence in front of Eduardo was enough to destroy everything he had. Career, reputation, family. He knew it. They knew he knew. Then they delivered the first blow. If these photos go public, you'll be prosecuted. The press will tear you to pieces. Your family will be investigated for money laundering." Eduardo felt his heart slow beat by beat. The man continued. "Your wife is listed on a bank account in Cali. Your son was treated at a hospital linked to Fundación Santa Maria. All of it can become supporting evidence." Each word like a nail driven into the desk. Eduardo looked straight at them, even as his hands clenched until they went white. "What do you want?" The question was simple, but everyone understood its weight. The man on the left smiled, neatly, the same way Tony the collector once smiled at Big Sam. Not much, just a signature. He pulled out a thick stack of documents from his briefcase, neatly clipped together. On the first page, the extradition order for Pablo Emilio Escobar Gavidio in the United States. The DEA stamp read like fresh blood. The government needs someone who can't be bought to sign it. Someone trustworthy. That someone is you. Eduardo leaned back in his chair. His throat went dry. "I've stayed neutral," he said quietly. "I haven't taken any side." The other man let out a short, harsh laugh. "Neutrality is a luxury in this war. Standing in the middle means getting crushed from both sides." They let the words hang in the air, like a prophecy. Then the second blow landed. "Your wife could be arrested as an accomplice." Eduardo held his breath. "Your son, we know the hospital is requiring a follow-up after the surgery. If you're arrested, the boy won't be allowed to leave the country again." They weren't threatening. They were just describing. There are threats that don't need raised voices. Eduardo leaned back, eyes fixed on the stack of documents, as if it were a blade waiting to fall. Outside the window, Bogota was as noisy as ever, but inside the room, every sound seemed drained away. Two paths opened before him. The first, betray the DEA and the government, a death sentence without a trial. The second, betray Escobar, another death sentence, quieter, faster. Both led to death. They only differed in which death came first. The man on the right pushed the stack of documents closer. "You sign. We protect your family, get them out of Colombia. Ensure no one, no cartel can touch them." The promise was simple, cold, ruthless, and effective. Eduardo closed his eyes for a second, just 1 second, but in that darkness, he saw his son on the hospital bed, his wife clutching the medical files, the long nights waiting for test results. He didn't see ideals. He didn't see justice. He didn't see the neutrality he had once prided himself on. He only saw a man who wasn't strong enough to protect his family without signing the paper in front of him. When he opened his eyes, he looked at the two men in front of him, then at the stack of documents. His hand rose, slowly, as if hanging his life on his fingertips. They handed him a pen. No more words, none needed, and Eduardo signed. One stroke of the pen. One moment, one betrayal that he himself knew he could never take back. The DEA agents gathered the documents, tucked them neatly into the briefcase, as if they had just completed a business transaction. One said, voice light to the point of indifference, "Your family will be moved soon. You made the right choice." The door closed behind them. Eduardo sat alone, pen still in his hand. Suddenly, the office felt too small, too dark, too cold. He looked at his hand, trembling, weak, and understood that he had just signed something irreversible. No one told him that Escobar had known about this 6 weeks earlier. No one told him that the coffin had been prepared long ago. No one told him that the signature he had just placed didn't save his family, but only opened the door to what would come next. Eduardo only knew one thing: he had chosen, and it was the worst choice of his life. Eduardo set the pen down on the extradition order and thought everything had just begun. But for Pablo Escobar, everything had ended 6 weeks earlier. The news didn't come from one source, it came from 12. A taxi driver in Bogota saw Eduardo get into a car with two strange men with American accents. A court employee accidentally saw Eduardo's name on a meeting schedule with an internal code only the DEA used. A military police officer, on double payroll from the cartel, heard colleagues talk about Judge Sanabria getting unusual escort. A nurse at Santa Fe Hospital saw Eduardo's wife come to pick up the child's medical records with a face pale like someone carrying a sentence. All those small, scattered, disconnected fragments were gathered in a leather notebook belonging to a man no one in Medellin dared name out loud, El Patron. The first night Pablo heard the report, he just sat still in the large room at Hacienda Nápoles. Golden light shone on the walls full of auction-bought paintings. On the porch, animal sounds rose from his private zoo. Gustavo Gaviria sat across from him, reading each line of information again. Nothing but small details, who met whom, when, where. But when Gustavo looked up, Pablo had already understood everything long ago. He just smiled. A small smile, enough to make others feel a chill down their spine. He'll test himself, Pablo said, and fail. Not bitter words, just a truth Pablo had seen before Eduardo saw it himself. A neutral man pulled between two superpowers would break at his weakest point. Family. In the 6 weeks that followed, Pablo didn't leave Medellin much. He didn't need to. His network spanned Colombia, from the poor alleys of Comuna 13 to the cold offices of Congress. Every piece of information about Eduardo came back faster than the DEA could keep up with itself. The first time, Pablo got word that Eduardo met the DEA in a hotel room in Bogotá. The messenger was a room service employee, paid monthly just to remember high-ranking faces. He didn't talk much, the man reported, but he listened for a long time. Pablo nodded. The first time is always the weakest. A few days later, an officer in the court escort detail called Medellin. Tomorrow, they're changing the judge's route, he said. Not because of danger, just to avoid being followed. Pablo asked only one question. Who ordered it? DEA. Pablo noted it down. No exclamation mark, no extra reaction. Then came the news about Eduardo's son. A doctor at Santa Fe Hospital was on the cartel's payroll. He reported, they're urgently requesting medical records. Looks like the boy needs a follow-up. Gustavo glanced at Pablo. What do you think? Pablo picked up a cigar but didn't light it. They'll use the child first, he said. That's always where the DEA hits hardest. Each piece of data fell into place, like a puzzle piece. No shouting, no threatening calls, no action plans. Just Pablo, patient like a big beast, lying in wait in the jungle, knowing the prey couldn't escape its own fear. In the 3rd week, Pablo summoned a carpenter from Envigado to Hacienda Nápoles. This man had made coffins for cartel families since Pablo's great-grandfather's time. When he arrived, Pablo gave instructions, a miniature coffin, ebony wood, no decorations, just one metal engraving, E. Eduardo Sanabria. The carpenter didn't ask why, he just bowed and did it. Do you want me to touch his wife? One of the sicarios asked. Pablo shook his head. No, his son. No, so him. Pablo looked up, eyes straight and cold as stone. No one touches him before he signs, he said. I want him to cross the line himself. No anger, no rage, no vows of revenge. Just a calm order, as if discussing a business file. And that very calmness made everyone in the room understand this wasn't personal. This was a lesson for Ordo, for the DEA, for the government, and for anyone else watching. In the 4th week, Pablo received a copy of the new Supreme Court hearing schedule sent by an internal clerk. Eduardo's name appeared in a closed session. They want him to sign, Gustavo said. Pablo replied, he will sign. They know his weakness, and he knows they know. In the 5th week, the DEA increased escort. Guards appeared in front of Eduardo's house even though he hadn't requested it. That was the clearest sign. If a man needed that much security, it only meant he had agreed to something even he was afraid of. In the 6th week, the night before Eduardo signed the extradition order, Pablo called for the coffin to be brought from Envigado to Bogotá. No ceremony, no message, just one instruction: place it in front of his door at dawn. Gustavo asked, "Do you want me to stand nearby to make sure?" Pablo looked out the window, where hundreds of deer were grazing as if Colombia had no war. "No," he replied. "No one needs to stand there. When he opens the door, no explanation matters anymore." At dawn the next day, when Eduardo opened the wooden box and saw his name engraved on the coffin, Pablo was sitting drinking coffee at the hacienda, back against the chair, eyes not leaving the radio news. No smile, no visible satisfaction. Just one sentence he said quietly, like speaking to himself: "He has chosen, not choosing the DEA, not choosing the government, not choosing Pablo, just choosing the wrong person to betray." And when a man takes one wrong step in front of Escobar, the rest of the path has been shaped long ago. Eduardo woke up with the feeling that someone was watching him, even though in the room there was no one but 4 dark walls. He sat up, back drenched in sweat. The clock showed 5:12 a.m. Bogotá's dawn hadn't arrived yet, but he knew he couldn't lie there another minute. There are days that start before the light, and today was one of them. He walked into the living room. His wife was sitting on the chair, hands clasped tightly together. Neither of them said a word. On days like this, words only make things worse. She looked at him a second longer than usual, as if trying to memorize his face, then turned away. Eduardo put on his coat, picked up his briefcase, and stepped out the door. 2 black cars were waiting in the alley. 3 DEA agents stood under the yellow light, faces expressionless. No nod, no greeting, just the car door opening, and an arm gesturing. Eduardo got in like a man volunteering to meet his fate. Early Bogotá was shrouded in fine rain. High-rise buildings blurred as if covered in mist. The car glided in terrifying silence. No one told him anything. No one needed to. Eduardo looked out the window and saw the city passing like a slow-motion film. Streetlights, shops, early risers, everything normal, but he was not. When the car turned into the Supreme Court area, the rain grew heavier. Eduardo pulled his coat tighter, stepped out of the car. The door slammed behind him, the sound sharp like a knife cut. The DEA followed, keeping just enough distance to avoid attention, but close enough for him to feel their presence with every step. Inside the court, the long hallway stretched out. Neon lights poured down on the cold tile floor. Many faces glanced at him, then immediately turned away. No one wanted to get involved in the choice he was about to make. No one wanted to be dragged into what would happen next. A young clerk opened the door to room 214. "Judge Sanabria, everything is ready inside." His voice trembled very slightly, like someone who knew he was standing next to something bigger than justice. In the room there was only a large wooden table, a silver pen, and a thick file placed right in the middle of the table. No one else. No DEA, no reporters, no congressmen. Just an empty, silent room, like a stage waiting for the lead actor. Eduardo stood in front of that table for a very long time. Too long, but silence was the only thing he had right now. He pulled out the chair, sat down, his hand rested on the file. In a strange way, it carried the weight of a gun he had once seen when he was a young lawyer in Medellin. On the first page were bold, clear, merciless words: "Extradition order Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria." A raindrop fell from his hair onto the paper. the small sound but clear enough that he imagined the whole room echoing with a click, like the sound of the gun that didn't fire in Lenox Lounge in 1958. His hand shook just like Sam's when pulling the trigger. Shook because he knew, once he put pen to paper, it was no longer work. It was betrayal etched in black ink. He closed his eyes. An image flashed, his son lying in the hospital, breathing tube beside him. The boy's eyes still trying to smile when seeing his father. Then the image of his wife, hands trembling holding the medical files. Then the white flowers from that surgery day. He breathed deeply, the breath heavy like pressed stone. This is the only way to save them, he told himself, not to convince the DEA, not to convince Pablo, not to convince Colombia, just to convince himself. He opened the last page, the blank space for the signature. His hand rose slowly like a man placing his life on the scale. The pen touched the paper, and Eduardo signed. No thunder, no crash, just a slightly curved ink line, but it cut across his entire life. The moment the ink dried, the door opened. The DEA walked in, without waiting for an invitation. The leader smiled, a smile both polite and cold. "Thank you, Judge. A big step forward for the country." No one asked how he felt. No one asked if this was right. No one asked if he wanted anything. Another man collected the file, closed the briefcase with a motion light, as putting away a store-bought item. "Your family will be moved to a safe place," they said. "We'll handle the rest." Eduardo stood up, his legs slightly unsteady. When he walked out of the room, the hallway seemed darker than when he entered. The people he passed all avoided his eyes, not out of contempt, out of fear, great fear. A man who signs Escobar's extradition order is a man carrying death on his shoulders, even if it's not his own death. He walked down the court steps. The rain fell heavily. The drops hit his face, cold, stinging. The DEA opened the car door. Eduardo stood for a moment in the rain, then got in. The door closed, blocking all outside noise. The car started moving, rolling down the slope. Eduardo looked out the window. Bogotá gradually blurred into streaks of light. He placed his hand on his forehead, closed his eyes. His whole body sank into silence. No one in the car knew that when he signed, hundreds of miles away, a man in Medellin was sitting back in his chair, sipping a cup of coffee in the quiet of the early morning. No one in the car knew that the small coffin had been placed in its position before Eduardo woke up. No one in the car knew that the only thing that changed today was that Eduardo had finally done what Pablo had been waiting for. Eduardo opened his eyes. The rain was still falling, heavy, unrelenting. He leaned his head against the glass. Each drop shattered when it hit the car window, just like every belief he had ever held. And in the moment the car turned the next corner, Eduardo felt clearly one thing: he was no longer the man who signed the order. He had become the man who had just ended his own name. Eduardo returned home when it was completely dark. The rain was still there, light but persistent, as if Bogotá was trying to wash away something it didn't even dare name. He stepped inside, took off his coat, hung it on the hook, then sat down in the chair like a man who had been drained of all strength. His wife stood in the kitchen, looking at him from afar, eyes full of questions but none spoken. Those who understand each other deepest often know when not to ask. He said nothing to her, nothing about the court, nothing about the DEA, nothing about the signature, nothing about the people who followed him from start to end of the day. He just sat there, looking at his hands, the hands once praised as strong and just in so many trials, now trembling lightly like an old man's hands. He went to bed early. not because he was tired, but because he couldn't bear being awake another minute. But sleep didn't come. His chest tightened every time he closed his eyes. The image of the last page in the file, where his signature lay alone, twisted in his mind. And beneath all those images, like an echo from the bottom of a deep well, was a sentence he had never heard directly, but felt clearly. He'll test himself and fail. When the dim light of early morning filtered through the window, Eduardo knew he couldn't delay any longer. He needed air, needed to step outside, needed to escape that stifling room, even for a moment. He opened the door. The black wooden box was there, exactly in the same position as the day before. No rain wet around the box, no footprints on the ground. No one had left this place. No one had entered. The box as if placed down from another world. Eduardo bent down. His hands shook even as he tried to stay calm. The lid was lighter than he remembered, or perhaps his strength was weaker. Inside was the miniature coffin, polished ebony wood, gleaming black, his name engraved in metal cold as tombstone. The beauty of something crafted too meticulously, for a purpose too ruthless. He knew immediately. It was not a threat, not intimidation, not a display of power. It was a verdict. He reached inside, feeling again the .45 bullet lying in the center. It was heavier than yesterday, or his mind was heavier. It was hard to tell. A single bullet, no gun, no shooter, just a choice. Who would use it, and when? Beneath the bullet was the folded piece of paper, the same one he had opened yesterday. But now he read it with the full awareness he hadn't had 24 hours earlier. The same handwriting. The first time I pay you, the second time you choose. P.E. Just as Bumpy Johnson's 5 words had crushed Big Sam, Escobar's 6 words crushed Eduardo. You choose. Eduardo dropped to his knees. Not from fear of death. People facing death usually react differently. His knees buckled from a simple realization. He had been led, not forced, not threatened, not with a gun to his head. Led, he had fallen into the exact pit he thought he was avoiding. Then he saw another piece of paper, stuck at the bottom of the box. A hospital bill carefully folded. He opened it. The bill for his son's heart surgery, stamped paid in full. Payment date 1 day before he signed the extradition order for Pablo Escobar. He felt his heart being pulled out of his body. Pablo had not stopped him from signing. Pablo had not sent men to threaten him. Pablo had not returned the envelope to remind him of favors owed. He had let Eduardo sign it himself, and that betrayal, what Eduardo thought was a secret or a sacrifice, turned out to be exactly what Escobar needed to teach the entire system a lesson. Never think you can stand between him and his fate. The cruelest part was Pablo had paid to save his son before he betrayed him. It was not a transaction. It was evidence. Evidence that Escobar was not controlled by Eduardo's loyalty, but by human nature itself. Everyone has a breaking point. Eduardo stood up with difficulty, his eyes blurred from rain or tears. He could no longer tell. When he looked up, a figure stood at the end of the alley, not approaching, not drawing a gun, not threatening, just standing there, silent as stone. A young man, black coat, empty eyes. Eduardo didn't need to ask who he was. That kind of gaze only appeared in one organization. El Patron says. The man spoke, voice even and quiet as mist. You have 12 hours to leave Colombia. That was all. No one touched him. No one held him back. No one arrested him. No one asked him why. No violence. No weapons. No weapons. No second warning. The man turned and walked away. Footsteps light as if not touching the ground. No looking back. No need to look back. Eduardo stood alone in the street, the wooden box still open at his feet, the miniature coffin still lying there like the final link in a chain of events he had never controlled. Escobar's power did not lie in gunfire, not in bodies, not in explosions. His power lay in not needing any of those things to end a man. He only needed silence, and let the coffin answer for him. Eduardo left Colombia within the deadline. No one pursued him, no one stopped him, no one checked his papers. As he walked into El Dorado International Airport, security staff glanced at him and went back to their work. No one asked why a judge was traveling with so little luggage for a one-way trip. No one wanted to know. He boarded the plane as the sun was just rising. A weak light shone on his weary face, and in the moment the cabin door closed, Eduardo understood that his old life had ended the instant he saw the coffin on the doorstep. The airplane door closed softly, so softly that he was horrified to realize death never makes a sound. It only slams shut the possibilities. People no longer dare to consider. In Bogotá, the story spread faster than any official news could control. That afternoon, a small newspaper ran the headline, "Judge Eduardo Sanabria suddenly resigns due to health reasons." Other papers followed. Some added details about him temporarily moving abroad. No one asked further. No one dug deeper. The best journalists in Colombia also knew there are stories that are not their job to tell. Eduardo disappeared from the country like a small boat swallowed by fog, silent, no waves, no trace. At the Supreme Court, the silence was thicker than stone walls. The Ministry of Justice sent a memo requesting candidates to replace Judge Sanabria. But when the list was presented, all 17 names unanimously refused to handle any files related to Pablo Escobar. No one gave a reason. No one needed to. When pressed, an older judge simply replied, "We do not sign our own fate." That same afternoon, a group of DEA officers was seen leaving the building with faces as dark as a storm sky. In their office on the top floor of the Hotel Tequendama, one agent slammed his fist on the table and said the line that became internal legend, "This is the coldest night in Bogotá." No one responded, no one defended, no one denied, because they knew the most important thing. If a single small coffin was enough to make the entire judicial system tremble, they were no longer facing a cartel. They were facing a symbol. In Congress, debate on the extradition treaty was postponed indefinitely. Lawmakers who had once declared Colombia must cooperate strongly with Washington suddenly changed tone, talking about national sovereignty, political stability, complex social situation. Every statement carried unease, as if someone were standing behind them. In reality, no one was standing behind them, just fear. The news of Eduardo's disappearance created a deep crack in the heart of the system. Judges, congressmen, ministers, prosecutors, all understood one thing. If Escobar did not kill Eduardo, did not threaten Eduardo, did nothing except let him collapse under the weight of his own choice, then that was more terrifying than any assassination. In a secret Ministry of Justice meeting, a younger man blurted out, "Is there any evidence Escobar was behind this?" The room fell silent. An older man looked at him and replied, "Evidence? In this Colombia, when there is no evidence, that's when you should be most afraid." While Bogotá sank into a fear that seeped into every hallway, every office, every whisper, Medellin was suspiciously quiet. No gunfire, no explosions, no bodies on the streets, just a strange silence enveloping the city, the kind of silence that only appears when a major decision has been made, and no one is foolish enough to question it. Escobar did not call the press, did not send letters, did not meet with lawyers, did not let his men brag. He simply lived the day like any other, walking around the ranch, checking the horses, drinking black coffee in the large room overlooking the misty lake. That afternoon, two of his closest men, Popeye and an armed unit commander, entered the meeting room to report on the government's reaction. Popeye placed the report on the table. El Patron, they've postponed all discussions on extradition. No one dares touch the new files. Pablo did not look up. He was still gazing at the lake, where the water was flat as a mirror. A kingfisher flew by, creating a small ripple before disappearing. Has anyone asked about Eduardo? Pablo asked. No, sir, the commander replied. Everyone is avoiding the topic. A pause. Popeye looked at Escobar and asked quietly, "Who did you teach the lesson to, El Patron? Eduardo or the DEA?" Pablo set down his coffee cup, turned it slightly, and said, "Not Eduardo." His voice was as even as the lake before him. Then he continued, slowly, word by word, the ones watching him. Boppy bowed his head. The commander said nothing more. In that room, everyone understood. This lesson was not for the one punished, it was for those witnessing it. As the Medellin sun set behind the hills, orange light spreading over the city, Pablo stood up and drew the curtains. A day passed without a single shot fired, without a traitor needing to be dealt with, without a warning needing to be issued. Escobar's silence was stronger than exploding bombs. His silence paralyzed all of Bogotá. His silence made an entire system self-censor. That night, as Medellin grew dark, a single sentence spread through the mouths of those who knew. You don't need to see Escobar to know he's watching you. The news of Eduardo's disappearance did not make the front page, but it didn't need to. The most important stories in Colombia always spread their own way, through the coffee vendor, the taxi driver, the administrative clerk, the night shift cop, and finally to the ears of those sitting in Congress. No one spoke loudly. They just lowered their voices enough for the person across from them to hear, and for those nearby who didn't want to hear, to still unconsciously remember. In a café near Plaza de Bolívar, two young lawyers spoke to each other in slightly trembling voices. "You know about Judge Sanabria, right? He's gone. They say he didn't sign any more files after that." The other looked down at his coffee cup and said softly, "No one signs anymore." In the congressional hallways, a veteran lawmaker placed a hand on his aide's shoulder and said, "We have to be very careful when putting Escobar's name in documents. Very careful." The aide asked, "Why?" The lawmaker looked at him and said nothing. The aide understood that was enough. In a courtroom, a young judge was assigned to review a file related to the cartel's financial network. He opened the file, flipped a few pages, then pushed it aside as if it were burning hot. When the clerk asked if it should be sent to another department, he just shook his head. "No, leave it there. Don't touch it." No one needed to know the reason. No one dared ask. The story of Eduardo spread, and in the strangest way, not through details but through feeling. People didn't talk about the box, didn't talk about the coffin, didn't talk about the bullet or the note. All those things became symbols in their minds, existing without needing description. They only said two lines, like a quiet reminder to each other when facing a decision. Pablo pays the first time. The second time, he sends the coffin. Those words were enough to paralyze any desk with a DEA stamp, any Ministry of Justice meeting room door, and any pen about to touch paper bearing Escobar's name. A young prosecutor, assigned to draft a new extradition request, skimmed the file, then closed it immediately. His boss walked in and saw the file lying untouched on the desk. "Why isn't it done?" "I think we should wait." His boss looked at him and asked nothing more. Waiting was the only way to survive in Colombia these days. A high-ranking anti-narcotics police officer received a call from above, telling him to prepare. He replied, "Yes, let me review it." But he didn't review it. He put the file in a drawer, locked it, and kept the key in his breast pocket. No one opened it again. No one wanted to. Even inside the DEA, those in the highest positions understood they had touched something that didn't operate by American rules. A veteran agent looked at a younger colleague and said, "Here, the scariest thing isn't guns, it's silence." And Medellin? The city understood the story differently. In the poorest barrios, people mentioned Escobar's name in low voices but without trembling. They didn't see Eduardo's disappearance as a threat. They saw it as a reminder that El Patron didn't need to declare anything, didn't need to appear, didn't need to shoot anyone. Just let a man walk into his own mistake. The cartel wasn't stronger because of violence, not stronger because of bombs or bodies on the streets. The cartel was stronger because of reputation, because of the certainty that anyone who thought they could harm Escobar would pay, not with blood, but with something worse, disappearance from their own role. In a closed Ministry of Interior office, a young official whispered to his superior, "Are we continuing to push extradition?" The superior closed the file and sighed. "No, not now." When then? I don't know. But not now. That was how a government retreated without declaring withdrawal. While Bogotá drowned in fear spreading like poison gas, Pablo Escobar sat in his wooden chair in the office at Hacienda Naples. No reports, no celebration, no new orders, just looking at the lake outside the window, the water flat, as if nothing had ever happened in the world. A subordinate standing nearby asked quietly, knowing he didn't like noise, "El Patron, who did you teach the lesson to? The government? The DEA?" Pablo set down his coffee cup, slowly. "Not them." The subordinate swallowed. "Then who?" He looked up, his eyes holding no anger, only the absolute certainty of someone who understood human nature better than any law, the ones watching him. And then he fell silent. No more words, none needed. Outside the window, the Medellin afternoon light touched the lake, creating a thin streak like a blade's edge. A flock of birds flew across, cutting the sky in two. In Colombia, some stories don't need an ending. They end the moment they begin. The final word about Pablo Escobar at that time did not come from the press, the government, or the DEA. It came from ordinary Colombians, passed along like a truth no one dared test again. Escobar doesn't threaten, he predicts. And when he sends the coffin, the story ended long before the recipient opened it. If you want to hear more stories where power comes from silence rather than gunfire, hit subscribe right now. Thank you for watching to the end. See you in the next story, where the truth always arrives before people even realize it.